What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me here on episode 95 of the 90 Feet From Home Fantasy Baseball Podcast. We are presented by Underdog Fantasy, and I'm your host, Joe Orico. You guys can check me out over on Twitter at JoeOrico99. That's where I'm sharing out all of my newest stuff, podcasts, articles, all of that. You can check it out over there. But we are doing another special episode today. It's going to be potentially a little bit of a tough one for our guest on the show, who is somebody that I've known for several years. He was one of the first friends I made in the industry, and he was the most frequent guest that I ever had on my old podcast. It's, of course, Mike Carter. You can find his work over on Twitter at MDRC0508. It's the best Twitter handle in the land. You can find him writing over at Fantrax, at Rotoballer, 9 Inning Know-It-All. He's doing a ton of stuff, and he's also co-hosting the FSWA nominated Fantasy Baseball Beat podcast along with Chris Torres and Dave Funnell. Mike, it's great to get you on to do our White Sox season review. I'm sorry about the subject matter, but it's always great to talk with you, my friend.
Joe, thanks for the great introduction, as always. Yes, our friendship goes back a number of years now. It goes back a couple of Arizonas as well.
Yep.
Looking forward to seeing you there in about 2 weeks. Okay. We're getting close to that time, and I'm very much looking forward to being there and having some beers with you and just shooting bull and talking ball. I love talking about the White Sox. It's all good, man. Like, I don't take it personally, and it was pretty rough this year, no doubt. Probably the worst season I've ever seen them have. Statistically, it was the worst season we've ever seen them have. But there are some things there that could be interesting for us to talk about. So,
yeah, we'll get into it for sure. I mentioned the places that you are writing. Anything in particular coming out? I know we're into the off season now. Is it kind of a little bit of a hiatus from you? Or are you still pumping stuff out? What's going on in your world right now?
Well, I'm working on a couple things over at Fantrax right now. We're working on putting out a like a winter magazine type of thing. That I'll be working on some of that stuff. We don't have a lot of direction yet on how that's all working, but we're doing that. The Rotoballer stuff is pretty calm right now. I'm going to try to be writing like once a month. It's been weird, my time to write really is Saturday morning, and the last 2 Saturdays I've woken up and I've been like, what the hell do I do now? Like, I like literally made a cup of coffee and read my book, and I'm like, wow, it's just so weird I had written every Saturday since like the first week of January, so it's kind of like scratching that itch that's not, that you don't have that limb anymore, like they talk about that kind of stuff. So not too much going on right now. We're still doing the podcast every other week. We got Chris Cotillo coming on this week to talk Red Sox, who are going to have a fascinating offseason, it looks like. And just, hanging around with the family, working, staying busy, and getting ready for Arizona.
Arizona is always a lot of fun. Yeah, this will be my 3rd time. I think, Mike, you're at least 4, if not 5 at this point, right? 4 for you this year? I think you're 1 up on me.
Yeah, I think this is my 4th one that I'm going to this year, yes.
So make sure you guys check out Baseball HQ. I always like to give those guys a plug. It's a great weekend. I'm going to be on a panel. I think, Mike, you're going to be on at least one panel as well, right?
Yes, I am. Rick Graham from Pitcher List and I are presenting on Thursday night on holds and where to find these types of relievers to do that, and also discussing relievers who transition to starters and starters who transition to relievers and what we look for in those types of guys.
Okay, this was a very interesting year for relievers transition to starters, so that'll be a lot of fun. I'm going to be on with Jason Collette and Ray Murphy talking about some year-over-year trends. That'll be, I think, the opening panel on Thursday, so a lot of fun there, and then I'll be with Vlad Sadler on the FTN podcast on Saturday. So a lot of fun in Arizona. Come out if you can. It's always a blast. I can't recommend it highly enough. But, Mike, let's get down to business. Let's talk some White Sox. I tend to like to start these on the offensive side and then work our way over into the pitching side. And I think, if we're going to look at the offense, it kind of starts with Luis Robert here. He is kind of the brand name in the offense. And it was not a great year for him. It wasn't really a terribly great year for anybody in the offensive side. There was still a little bit of fantasy juice, 14 homers, 23 steals, but he hit 224. And it honestly just seemed down the stretch that he just didn't care anymore. Maybe that's not accurate, but it just seemed like he was really not putting forth. And I don't know how much I want to read into it really, but it just didn't seem like he really gave a crap down the stretch. And maybe that's just hard to blame him because of the state of the team. But what did you think getting an up close view of Lou Bob here? Do you think he kind of just, threw in the towel on the season at some point, or was he just actually struggling? What was your analysis on him?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all those things that you pointed out. Obviously, the team was miserable. He fought through some injuries, as he seems to do every year. The power was way down. The swing never looked like he was super comfortable. The outfield play was really kind of shockingly bad. This is the guy that is a Gold Glove outfielder. I think part of the thing is that, when you're playing with guys that aren't very good, and you're kind of rotating, quad A guys around your lineup around him, I think he found a hard time kind of being the quote unquote star. I think that the White Sox have known for a long time that he's a really special talent, but not necessarily somebody that you build around, which might sound weird to people who are not Sox fans. But he was meant to be just another one of the guys and not be the guy that you build around. That being said, the batting average was way down. He never looked comfortable at the plate to me. I don't think of him as a power hitter when I think of him. I think of him as a line drive hitter, gap to gap hitter with great speed. So he did steal bases this year. So he did give you a little bit of juice, but where you drafted him this year, boy, you had to be really disappointed with what you got from him. Now, there's a lot of folks that are running around saying, well, they'll probably trade him in the offseason. And I think that that's an interesting idea. And I don't see that being a huge issue if they wanted to move him. But I don't know what his value is to the rest of the league right now. I mean, I think you'd be selling pretty low on him. It would not surprise me at all if they kept him and maybe tried to move him at the break if he, not that break, I mean, at the trade deadline, I'm sorry. If he starts to be able to play better. To be able to play better, they probably got to put some better pieces around him, which is a little bit of a questionable idea at this point. But he definitely was a disappointment on the year. Not the biggest disappointment on the team, probably, but pretty close anyway.
Considering the expectations, you could make that case for sure. This is a guy who just the year prior he almost had a 40-20 season. It was 38-20. He hit 264. To your point, the defensive metrics were terrible this season as well. Everything kind of just fell apart for him. So I wonder, and it's kind of the same thing that we're dealing with in Toronto here as a Blue Jay fan with Bo Bichette. A lot of people are saying they want to sell him, but after a year where he was injured and had a down year, selling the guy when his value's at his lowest just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. We might have even talked about this one on when I was on your podcast, Mike, a little bit of Bo Bichette talk.
Yep.
But I think with Lou Bob, he's only 27 years old. And if you do start to, as an organization anyway, put some more pieces around him, show them that you're more serious about rebuilding the team, maybe that does kind of change around some of those mental factors. And that's all conjecture. Who knows if that's actually something that really means anything or not? Was he actually, putting forth the best effort or not? I don't know. It just seemed like, he's hitting like a 120 or something over the last month of the season. It was really, really terrible. But let's say, Mike, he comes into the season as a member of the White Sox. They don't trade him in the offseason. Are you going to be interested in buying what will inevitably be a rather sharp dip in cost next season?
My thought on a guy like Luis Robert is that you're always weighing out some level of risk with him that's more than other guys are. Even this year, like, he had the finger thing, he had the hamstring thing, he had a rib thing. Like, I keep waiting for that year where he puts together, 650 at bats. And I just don't think we're going to get that. Right. So even this year, he had 425 plate appearances, and WRC plus was 84. Like, I think I'm going to probably let somebody else take that opportunity, because I'm guessing that somebody's going to think that he's going to be primed for a bounce back and is going to be willing to spend on him in a place where I won't. I can't see doing anything in the top 5 or 6 picks for him, which means I probably won't get him.
Yeah, I wonder if he will potentially fall out of the top 100 in some cases. I think that's kind of would have to be the line for me. If he's going past pick 100, it's still so early, and I've seen a couple of draft boards flying around, and the ADPs there's no real ADP after 3 drafts.
Right.
But it's hard to know if somebody's going to want to take the bite, because all it takes is one person to look back a year and say, he could give you a 40-30 season if he's healthy. Even if he's hitting 250 or something like that, the runs and RBIs might not be great in that lineup, but there could potentially be somebody who is really interested in buying back in. I think for me, around pick 100 is where I'd have to start considering it. If he's going anywhere inside of it, for me, it probably would be a no. Moving on to another guy who actually had a pretty decent year, all things considered, in Andrew Benintendi. Better than we thought, anyway, better than I was expecting. And I think that comes with the 20 home runs. Obviously, the counting stats were not really a lot to go around in this lineup, but 50 runs, 64 ribbies. He stole 3 bases. Wasn't a great batting average, but 20 home runs from Andrew Benintendi. There were certain stretches of the year where he was a pretty decent play in the second half, where I was putting him into some lineups and getting some juice out of him in 15s, and even in some 12-teamers in 5 outfielder formats, he was not too bad. What were your thoughts on Benintendi? I believe he's still got a couple years left on this deal, so he's going to be around next season. What were your thoughts, and what are your thoughts going forward as well?
Yeah, I mean, they signed him to a 5-year, $75 million deal in 2023 that runs through 2027. So he's here for the duration, I think. I've always had a hard time with Benintendi. When he was on the Red Sox and he was first coming up, I thought, wow, this is a guy that's going to be a great volume play. He's going to hit 20 home runs, he's going to get 20 stolen bases, he's going to hit about 270, 280. And he kind of did that for like a year. And then he's gone through different iterations of who he is, right? So like, when he went to Kansas City, he gave up all the power to become ostensibly a better hitter, right? I mean, I think he had 5 home runs that year, but he hit 304, and very little ISO. The walk rates are always about 9-10%. Strikeout rates always, usually pretty low, other than a couple of seasons where he had some outliers. But I think he is at this point what he is, right? I mean, 20 home runs matched his career high this year. The 64 RBIs, let's be honest, the Sox didn't have anybody to drive in. The batting average was a little lower than what I thought it would be. I mean, 229, I guess it doesn't kill you. I think of Benintendi as like a 5th outfielder based on matchups in a 5 outfielder type of league. You know what I mean? Like the leagues that you and I play in, I think he fits in fine there. But he's going to play 130 games. He's going to hit 20 home runs. He's going to not, get a handful of steals, although he had only 3 this year and he had 13 last year. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I guess you say, you take with the uptick in power, do you take the downturn in batting average? I guess that's okay, but he's 30. There's no new level coming. This is who he is. He's a fine guy to have on a team. He's not a guy that you build around, unfortunately. I've heard some rumors about him being on the trade market too, that the Sox would like to unload that contract, even though $15 million a year isn't unheard of for the level of production that he's putting out. His WRC plus was like 93. So he was about average, he's just, I thought the Sox were getting more when they got him, quite honestly, than what they've gotten.
Yeah. He's kind of an interesting guy because if you look at the course of his career, like you said, like he started off as a 20 kind of home run guy. And then there was a couple of years consecutively where it was 5 and 5. And then going back up to 20, but then the speed suffers and it goes from 8 steals to 13 down to 3. And he has previously stolen 20. The batting average has been as high as 300, as low as 220. It's like, who the hell is he? I'm not sure what to really expect next year. If he hits 22 home runs or if he hits 7 home runs, let's say he stole 4 bases or he stole 17. Like there's such a range for him. I feel like he is somebody where it'd have to be a 5th outfielder, like you mentioned, a guy to have on my bench. You play him in the right matchups, because it does kind of worry me not knowing exactly what he's going to look like. Like, will he get there in terms of value? Maybe, but it's just, he's so random year in and year out. It usually ends up equaling about 25 steals and home runs put together. So I guess you can kind of look at it from that perspective, but he's a bit of a wild card for sure. Andrew Benintendi is. Andrew Vaughn is the next guy I wanted to kind of touch on here. He's not really panned out to what we were hoping for as a number 3 overall pick. It's easy to forget, but he was a top 3 draft pick. He hasn't bottomed out or anything. He's been okay. Defensively, the metrics are not kind to him. They're not really that great for most first basemen. They tend to take a bit of a hit there if you look at defensive value. In terms of like WAR equations, first baseman tend to take a bit of a hit, but he was negative WAR this season, even with 19 home runs, 70 ribbies, and a 246 batting average. I guess with Vaughn at this point, we have our expectations fully readjusted, but is there any glimmer of hope that he could potentially still turn into that guy that was a top 3 pick at this point, or have you guys kind of thrown in the towel on that one?
I haven't. I mean, I think he's still a young guy, and they really forced him into a major league presence probably before he was ready. I think the Sox oftentimes feel like they have to justify those high picks very quickly. And they brought him up. I mean, he had less than 200 at bats in the minor leagues before the Sox brought him up. I think he's a better hitter than what we've seen. I don't know about the power. I mean, I see him as a gap-to-gap guy with the accidental home run thrown in. But he's had 2 years in a row with over 600 plate appearances, and we haven't really seen much other than just average production. Now, you have to also consider with that, too, he has played through injuries very quietly. He's had this foot and ankle issue that he's had for almost 2 years now, and he fought through that again this year and played through it. He was also platooning at times with Gavin Sheets, which I didn't really fully understand. I think that he's another one of those guys that if he was in the right lineup in the right spot, that he might be a little bit more productive than what he is. But let's keep in mind that the White Sox don't really have a leadoff hitter or a number 2 hitter, and so hitting third or fourth in this lineup doesn't really mean anything. There's not a lot of RBI opportunity, so there's a little bit of deflation in that. I think he's probably going to be the cheapest he's ever been this year in drafts. And I could see taking him as a bench bat or as a corner type of infield guy and rolling the dice with him again. Yeah. The one thing that I would caution people, though, is that there's also a lot of talk that, he's arbitration eligible now. And there's been some talk that the White Sox might let him walk. I don't know if that would really end up being the case. He's a $3 million player on a team that's trying to cut payroll is probably pretty valuable. Yeah. So I think that he'll probably stay in a White Sox uniform. But to your point, they're expecting more than what they've gotten. I mean, this is a guy he's batted over 2,000 times in the major leagues, and he's got a 253 batting average. It's like he's not really, to your point, he's not really panned out.
72 home runs in that time frame as well. I wonder, Mike, because Jose Abreu was still there when he came up, and he was a first baseman, but they had to put him in the outfield. Do you think that potentially messed up his development in any way, defensively or offensively?
Yeah, the White Sox are famous for this, right? They take a guy that's never played a position and say, well, now you're going to play right field. Well, it's a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, and they kept Jose Abreu, who you might recall. I mean, we've been talking about him for a couple of years. I told you before he left for Houston that he was done. And when he was his last year with the White Sox, a lot of people thought he was having this rebirth and going to the Crawford boxes in Houston, and I just didn't see it.
Yep, end up here. I fell into it.
Lots of ground balls to shortstop. Anyway, long story short, I think that did really screw him up, and I think that playing on teams that have been pretty bad the last couple of years has really screwed him up too. I'm willing to kind of give him a reboot, I think, on the right situation. And I don't see them not keeping him just based on the fact that they don't really have anybody else at this point. I mean, Tim Elko is going to be down in Arizona Fall League, so we'll see him in a few weeks. He's a kind of a big power hitting first baseman, but he's already 26. They don't really have like a big name prospect guy that's like chomping at the bit to get in there to move on out. So I don't see that happening. I think he'll be their first baseman next year.
Yeah, and I haven't really dug in so much on first base. I've heard a couple people talk about how it's looking pretty grim for next year. So maybe if you're in a 15-team league and he ends up as a corner infielder, there could be something there. Especially because to your earlier point, his price, I can't imagine he goes in the top 300, even maybe 350 picks. He's going to be going pretty late, I would imagine. Does that sound right to you? Maybe 300, 350 for him?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, I can't see him going before that.
Not on my team, so he won't go before that anyway. Let's move on to Gavin Sheets, who you mentioned earlier. He played a hell of a lot this year, 139 games, over 500 plate appearances, but just 10 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 233. Is there anything here with Gavin Sheets, you think, Mike? Defensive metrics are really not kind, to say the least, for him. Is there anything here from any point of view?
I never thought he was a player anyway, quite honestly. I mean, he's been with the Sox now for a few years. He's had over 1,400 career at-bats. He's a 230 hitter. He's got a little bit of pop occasionally. This year would have been a really good year for him to kind of grow. But in 501 plate appearances, the only 10 home runs, like you said, I just don't think he's any good. He's another guy that's a guy without a position. Is probably best suited as a part-time DH, but do you really need to carry a 28-year-old part-time DH? I mean, I would guess that he will find bench work with somebody. I'm guessing that he's not going to be on the Sox next year.
Yeah, I just don't think there's really too much there from a fantasy point of view, from a real life point of view. I think It's not looking great for him, and I think he's just about to be 29 years old too. He's not exactly a prospect either, so
Right, right.
I don't think there's too much there. Quickly on Lenyn Sosa, I don't think there's too much here either. 8 home runs, 3 stolen bases, a 254 batting average, over 100 games. What are your thoughts on him, Mike? My Fangraphs is currently having some kind of glitch, and I'm not seeing his contract status, but I believe he's still yours for a couple of years, I believe, right?
Yeah, he is, and I'll tell you about Sosa. I feel the same way. I don't really know what he's good at. I mean, he went through a couple of stretches this year where they just let him play, and that was one thing with the White Sox this year that I didn't really understand. Like, if you're going to stink and be historically bad, why stink with Nicky Lopez playing every day? Like, you know what he is. He's not going to be any better. Like, they say, oh, he's defensively, he's really good. Okay, fine, but why not give those young guys a little bit more of a chance? Let Ramos play. Let Sosa play. Sosa flashed a little bit in a couple of places. He's got some real good power, and was a guy that was a real high-rated prospect for them for a long time. And then when Tony La Russa was here, he totally messed with his mind. You know, they had him up for a week or two, and then they made an example out of him because he wasn't hustling, and they sent him back down. I don't know that anybody ever really communicated with him what it was that they wanted him to be. And then you have this year again, you know, he's kind of a meathead, right? You know, he has a ball go off of his face on the throw down to second base he wasn't expecting. It's like, dude, you've done that thousands of times as a kid and as a player now, and you're going to cover second base on the throw down to start the inning, and it hits him right in the face. It was very symbolic of the type of year that the White Sox had. But he does have some power, you know. I mean, he's got 578 plate appearances at the major league level, and he's got 15 home runs. So there's a little bit there, maybe if he gets an opportunity playing second base, which he may. They don't really have a hell of a lot of options at this point either at that spot. Yeah. Maybe he gets a chance to play. Maybe he gets a little bit of runway. Maybe he's a guy that gets you 15 home runs and 10 steals as a late pick. I don't know. But that being said, I don't know how good he is. I still don't really have a good grip on whether or not this is a guy that is a piece moving forward for them or not.
Yeah, I don't mind that option, though, at the very end, because we're talking about guys that maybe going 300, 400. Like Lenyn Sosa is not going to go until past pick 500 easily, right. I think, in a lot of cases. So if he gives you 15 and 10, going even 450, 500, is like you'll absolutely take that. I do want to talk about Miguel Vargas, who was the big piece that came back in the Michael Kopech trade. Man, it has been rough for him. Like, really not just like, oh, he struggled a little bit. He's hitting 175 through 171 major league games. He's had a lot of hype as a prospect. I know a lot of very smart people have been in on him, but he's really stunk up the joint to this point in his career. He should have an everyday role next year. I think they'd be kind of crazy to not give him an everyday spot, see what they've got with him. What's your thought on Miguel Vargas? Is it potentially a chance for him to break out, or are you still a little bit skeptical?
Well, there's a lot of people here that are really down on him. And if you think about it from a young man's point of view, you have a 24-year-old guy, right, who is in the best organization in the sport, gets traded to the worst organization in the sport. The Sox gave up a lot of things, and that trade was really murky. Like, there was, at first we had heard that the Sox were getting Tommy Edman, and I was like, well, what the hell do they want Tommy Edman for? Like, that's not really gonna help them, right? Yeah. Like, and then you found out that St. Louis didn't give them anything, and they got Vargas and a couple minor league guys from the Dodgers, and you're like, wait a minute, what? We just gave up Kopech and Tommy Pham and these other guys, and we got Miguel Vargas. So here's what I see with him. I see a young guy who's really confused. He doesn't really have a position. Nobody's ever really just left him alone and let him play. Is he a second baseman? No. Is he a third baseman? No. Is he DH? No. They didn't really give him an opportunity to really kind of get himself established, either in LA or here. And I do think that he's a guy that's going to get an opportunity and should get an opportunity to be able to play next year. The guy has had very, very little playing time over the course of the last couple of years. And think about what Los Angeles did to him too, Joe. They had him up on the roster for a really long time, and they didn't play him as a 23-year-old. As a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, he's up on the major league roster and not getting a heck of a lot of opportunity to really be able to play. So if you look at numbers, he looks really bad. He doesn't have a horrible strikeout rate. He's a guy that's probably going to make more contact as he gets to play. I think they got to find a position for him and they got to let him be. Because what I see happening is that I think this is a guy that is a double-digit home run, double-digit stolen base, 260 hitter once he rounds into shape. He just needs an opportunity to be able to play, and the White Sox should be able to give that to him in abundance. A little bit concerning, the ground ball rate became a little bit disturbing there for a while, but I think he's so broken and confused that he just needs some time to get his head straight. But if the White Sox can't give him 600 at bats, who can? I mean, he's going to be a really good buy low at some point this year for somebody, because I really do think there's a baseball player there. And the Dodgers are not usually very wrong on these types of things.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, the Dodgers, first of all, like I feel you got to feel for the guy going from the Dodgers, even though he wasn't playing a hell of a lot, to go into the White Sox. That's got to do something for your mentals in a not great direction, to say the least. I still think that there could be something there, and it really just does come down. Like, I think I don't really need to even add on to what you said. It's perfect. He just needs to get an opportunity to play. You give him a whole season worth of at bats. You find a spot for him instead of bouncing him all over the place, because I don't think that, you make him a utility guy at 24. I don't know that that's really the right direction. Let him focus on one spot. Let him focus on his swing, because he's really struggled to this point. He has a good walk rate. He doesn't strike out too much, but man, you can't hit 175. No. I think it just really does come down to that consistent opportunity for Miguel Vargas. I do want to talk about Corey Lee, the catcher, who was in his own right kind of a bright spot here, especially for some fantasy managers in 15-team leagues. I know I plugged him in myself. He got 12 homers. I think the big thing, though, is 6 stolen bases from a catcher. You love to see it. He hit 210, which is fairly par for the course for a second catcher here. And for those of you who play in one catcher leagues, there's probably not too much here. But Mike, for 2 catcher formats, he was kind of a godsend at certain points. What are your thoughts on Corey Lee? Is he the catcher heading into next season for the White Sox, you think?
That's a great question, Joe. And I think that that's one thing that the White Sox did fairly well this year. Early on, it was a split between him and Martin Maldonado. Martin Maldonado looked like me catching, which was pretty bad. So they got rid of him pretty quick, and they ate some salary on that, and kind of navigated it with Chucky Robinson, who's nothing. But Corey Lee actually is a really interesting story. This was a guy who was Houston's top prospect for a while. The White Sox traded Kendall Graveman for him. So they actually won this trade, I would say, because Kendall Graveman missed all year last year with the shoulder issue. Corey Lee is a really good defensive catcher. He's a really good receiver. He's a good thrower. The pitchers really liked throwing to him a lot. I think what happens here is that it's going to be a split next year between him, and I think Edgar Quero will probably be the other catcher unless they decide to go with a low-priced veteran. I think they should go with Quero. And I think Corey Lee will probably get about 60% of those. I think he got a little exposed down the stretch by playing too much, but he's got some pop in that bat. I mean, it would not surprise me at all to see his batting average go up a little bit more as he learns the league even better and turn those 12 home runs into 15 home runs, even in less playing time. I think he's got a real live bat that the Astros were waiting on for a really long time, but they too never really gave him an opportunity. I was pretty excited when they got him because I knew just from seeing him play in AAA that he was a really good defensive player, which the Sox have been missing behind home plate for a really long time. And so I think that he will get a lot of playing opportunity. To your point, in a one catcher league, no, probably I wouldn't be looking at him. In a 2 catcher league, I definitely would be looking at him because that's a do no harm type of guy right there.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make the full comp, and I want to dig into it a little bit later, but it feels like it could be a Connor Wong type of situation from this year where he's just an afterthought, C2. You draft him because maybe you get a couple of stolen bases late, and maybe he can boost that batting average up a little bit, give you double-digit homers, potentially double-digit steals, because he stole 6, but he also got caught 3 times. 9 attempts for a catcher. That's 9 more than a lot of catchers are going to have. So I'll take that as a deep catcher too. Mike, just one more guy on the offensive side. We mentioned him. I think it was before we actually started recording, but Yoan Moncada wasn't really a part of the team this year. He just played 12 games. Is there a future for him in Chicago at this point? I think it's fairly safe to say that he hasn't panned out, and he probably won't at this point. He's about to be 30 years old next year. He's a 254 career hitter through 750 games. He has 93 homers. I don't really think that there's much to hold out for, but what are your thoughts here in Chicago? I feel like most people are ready to be done with him, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think, he's got a $25 million club option with a $5 million buyout.
Oh, Jesus.
And so, I mean, they're really, it hurts. I don't see any chance that he's gonna be on the White Sox next year.
Okay.
It's really kind of sad. I mean, the talent was there. It's he's really kind of, and I know it's hard to say this on a show like this, but he's really indicative of the White Sox problems, the types of guys that they've had over the last few years. There's a lot of guys on that team that got paid probably before they should have got paid. And at the time, it seemed like that was a really smart move. In retrospect, now that looks like a total failure of management. They thought they were getting something that they didn't get with him, with Eloy, with Tim Anderson. There was no leadership on that team. People will say that Jose Abreu was the leader, but he was very quiet. He didn't really say much of anything or do anything. And these guys were all about, the bling and the cars and the women and all the things that go along with that. And I don't feel like I'm talking out of turn on that. I think if you go look it up, you could probably find all the same things that I'm telling you. A couple of babies out of wedlock and stuff like that. I'm not here to be the moral police. I'm just saying that they spent millions of dollars on guys that they did not get the bang for the buck for. And Moncada is the poster child of that. This was a guy who was the number one prospect in the game when they got him, and he has not panned out. He will not play when he's not 100%. He doesn't know how to play banged up. There's all kinds of consternation about it. Now, I say that, and he'll probably land somewhere next year and hit like 300 and hit 25 home runs. That's probably what will happen because he'll leave the White Sox and somebody will unlock him, right? But it's just a really sad commentary on what could have been. This was a guy, if you go back, 3 years ago when they were playing the Astros in the playoffs, this is a guy that was batting cleanup on that team behind Jose Abreu, and now it's gone.
Man. Mike, I don't want to talk about the offense too much more. Let's talk about something that's even more sad. We'll talk about the pitching. The crazy thing that I came across in my research for the show was that the White Sox did not have one qualified starting pitcher this year. Chris Flexen was very close. It was 160 innings. I believe it's 162 innings you need to be qualified. So nobody did qualify. Let's start at the top of the rotation, and we'll start with actually the bright spot of the year, Mike. Before it all goes to shit, and we'll talk about the rest of the arms. Let's talk about Garrett Crochet, because my God, was he ever a revelation? He was arguably the breakout pitcher of the season. Yeah. Over 32 starts. It was kind of a little bit abbreviated there down the stretch with 3 and 4 inning outings, over 146 innings. But he had a 3.58 ERA. All of the ERA estimators were in the twos. It was a 2.83 expected ERA, a 2.38 expected FIP, a 2.53 Sierra. He had nearly a 30% strikeout minus walk rate, a 1.07 WHIP. He was a star. He was an absolute star. And if you took a chance on him late in your drafts, it paid off for you big time. Now, there's all these thoughts of Crochet potentially getting traded. There was all the drama about he maybe submarined a trade when he opened his mouth around the trade deadline. What are your thoughts on Crochet? Is he going to be a White Sox next season, first and foremost? Will he be around in spring training?
Well, there's a question about whether he will be or whether they should trade him. I don't think that they should trade him, but I think that they will. Yeah, okay. I think what they did all year, the reason why they did the 3 and 4 inning outings was to prove that he could make every start every fifth day. And there were a lot of times where they pulled him out where he was cruising, including against their Blue Jays at one point where he had like 7 strikeouts in 3 innings and they yanked him. Yeah. I think that they did that to try to build that value. I don't think that they want to pay him. The White Sox have no history of giving long-term contracts out to pitchers. They simply won't do it. Unless he signs like some type of short-term deal, which he should not do, and I don't think he will do. I think they will trade him this offseason. I think they will get a boatload for him. I think he proved that he is one of the top left-handed starters in baseball. Personally, I don't think they should trade him. You have to build around something, and I think he's the type of guy that you would build around. Plus, they have two of the top left-handed prospects in all of baseball reside with Chicago now, with Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz. They could really have a 3-headed monster there if they would keep that intact, but I doubt that they will. What they get for Crochet, I don't know. I haven't even heard any rumors about that. But if I were Chris Getz, the first person I'd be calling would be the guys out in Baltimore and say, hey, you guys really fucked this up. Pardon my language. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. You can say whatever you like on this show.
Let me. Can I interest you in Garrett Crochet? We'll take Jackson Holiday. Just something like that. I mean, I think that a shrewd move would be okay with that. But he proved everything that you would want him to prove. I mean, a lot of people were worried about the pitch mix when he started. He had the four-seamer and the cutter. And he's the four-seamer, going back a long way, was a pitch he threw about 70% of the time. He dumped that down to about 50% this year and really was using the cutter more and the sweeper less, but the sweeper was actually a really effective pitch for him. And this changeup that he was working on towards the end of the season to righties was really killer. It really developed as the year went on. So I think he's actually a guy that's on the cusp of having a 4-pitch mix. And no reason to think that he can't be one of the top 10, top 5, top 6 starters, honestly, in the major leagues next year. Again, granted, if he gets the innings, I think he only had 146 innings this year. He could have gone past that. I think that they were smart to not do that, but he could have pitched more.
I have him 8th in my current starting pitcher rankings. It's still a very rough draft for 2025, as it should be on October 14th. But he is 8th for me right now. I think that top 10 is definitely where he should be in that range. And if he were to get traded out of Chicago, you'd figure that the win potential would be boosted more. If he went to Baltimore or he went to the Dodgers or something, you can project more than 6 wins next season and more innings. So you could say that he could even push top 5. But the White Sox should build around him. Like you said, what are you going to build around? Like, you need to have something to build around. You can't just have nothing and say we're building. Right. I think that they should probably take Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet as the offensive core and the pitching core and probably build around them, because if they trade either or both, because I remember doing a couple podcasts around the trade deadline, and it was talked about, I can't remember if it was maybe Welsh or Bubba or somebody that suggested maybe like I'll package them both together and go to a team like the Brewers were talked about around the Christian Yelich injury. If they were to trade both of these guys, they'd need to get such a haul back to even pretend to contend, because even with them, it was such a rough season. You need to have something. You can't have, because outside of Crochet, like, you guys do have a couple of good prospect arms, and we can kind of segue that into a Drew Thorpe conversation, but Drew Thorpe is not ready to lead a rotation. Drew Thorpe struggled quite a bit. You need to have at least something in place. I think they should extend Crochet. He's already got a couple years of control still. I think 25 and 26 are arbitration years, but give him some money. Who else are you paying at this point? I think they should just extend him, and probably Luis Robert. I'm actually not 100% sure on Luis Robert's contract situation. I'll be honest. I'm not the greatest with contracts, but these guys are who they probably should be building around, Mike.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, you have to build around something. Luis Robert is signed through this coming year, 2025, with club options for 26 and 27, I believe.
Okay.
So to your point, you got to build around something, and those would be good pieces probably to build around if you do that. The other problem, though, is that you don't have any capital, right? Like, if you don't have great prospect capital in your system, what do? Do you sign free agents to kind of fill in those gaps offensively? Yeah. This is a system that's really strong in pitching, that's not real strong in offensive players. And so now you have a question of, like, if you decide to keep Robert and Crochet and you don't trade them, what do you trade to be able to get the pieces that you need to be able to hit? Like, they haven't proven that they can develop a hitter. They haven't done it in years, so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm guessing that they will hold on to Robert at least initially and trade Crochet this winter. It'd be my guess. I don't know that I agree with either one of those things, but I think that's probably what will end up happening.
They better get themselves a hell of a package back for Crochet, because there were times this season, I think it was maybe the second or third start of the year, I drafted a few shares of him thinking he was going to be the closer initially. And then, he started off really well, and it was a start against the Braves, I think, early on in the year. It was before Acuna got hurt. It was a full-powered Braves lineup, and he just destroyed them. It was like 6 or 7 innings, 10 or 11 strikeouts. It was unbelievable. It was really a coming-out party for him this year, and I hope for your sake, Mike, you guys get to see him for the next 5-7 years pitching in White Sox colors.
Would you trade Crochet for Jackson Holiday? Would you make that trade?
I'm personally a little worried about Holiday. I think that, the struggles are maybe a little more concerning than just, he came up and struggled initially, because he came up and struggled, he went back down, and then he came up and he continued to really struggle. And I was doing this a few weeks ago, digging into him and the similarities between him and Jared Kelenic. And they're, if you look at the first season for both of them and you swapped around the numbers, it'd be hard to tell which one was which. It's not to say that he's going to be Kelenic, and Jackson Holiday does have a hell of a lot of pedigree, but I mean, I don't know that I would do that straight up. If I were you guys, I would want to have, I don't know, I'd probably not put all the chickens in one, or all the eggs in one basket, I should say.
Yeah,
I'd probably try and go for a couple of higher, like if I was going to make a deal with Baltimore, depending on how you guys feel about the catcher situation, maybe you go for Basayo and, I don't know, one of their other, maybe a Hierstad, or a couple of pieces anyway. I think Holiday in and of him just on his own, I don't know if that would be enough for me personally, but I'm talking on a fantasy podcast. I am not getting paid to manage baseball teams, so take my opinion with a grain of salt there on that front. Keeping with the pitching side, though, I did mention Drew Thorpe. There were some positive signs here and there mixed in, but over his 9 starts, it was a tough scene. It was a bit of a tough scene. He wasn't striking guys out. He ended up with a 5.48 ERA. The WHIP at 126, not terrible. But the strikeout minus walk rate was 2%, Mike. He had a 13% strikeout rate, 11% walk rate. Really wasn't getting it done. And honestly, since he came over from the Yankees, the strikeouts kind of disappeared a little bit. He was like a 30+% strikeout rate guy in the Yankee system. He came over to you guys, and it was 25% in Double-A and then 13% in the majors. So what are your thoughts on Thorpe heading into next season? Could he potentially take that step forward? Is he ready to be somebody that we can trust in fantasy just yet?
I wouldn't trust him in fantasy just yet, but I was intrigued by him quite a bit watching him with the White Sox this year. Now, granted, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and we see what we want to see. I think the one thing that was kind of alarming is that his fastball's not real great. I mean, he's had 91-mile-an-hour fastball. His changeup is terrific, but he's got to get a little more oomph on that four-seamer, or figure out a cutter. Somewhat, he does throw a cutter, but he didn't throw it as much as what he probably could or should throw it. If he can get a little more oomph on that fastball, I think he's a number 3 starter. I think that's his ceiling, but he knows how to pitch. You hear people say that stuff all the time. Like, you get a guy that goes out there, he knows what he's doing. He's got a good feel for it. He's got to get a little bit more of that fastball. I was surprised by that, because in my mind, I thought, when you build a deal around a guy and you give up Dylan Cease and you build it around a guy like Thorpe, I thought he was going to be a little different than what he was. Not that I'm disappointed with him. I don't mean it that way, but I thought he'd have a little more oomph. He just is a good pitcher. I think he's going to be like a good number 3 guy at some point. I don't know that it will be this year, but I think that that's kind of what he is down the road.
Okay. Where would the price have to be for you this year for you to want to take a stab? Would it be 300, 400, 500? What's the number range for you right now?
Yeah,
I know it's very early.
Probably 450 plus for me. I mean, he had the bone spur taken out too, which is probably part of the reason why he didn't pitch as great. You got a bone spur in your elbow, you're probably not feeling too great. Yeah. And who knows how clean that comes back for him. I think that's going to be a big thing to look at. But the lack of strikeouts is alarming. You'd like to see somebody, at least won an inning or thereabouts, right? To see what he did was a little bit troubling.
For sure. Let's move on and let's talk Jonathan Cannon, who actually, there were some signs this year, and I know there were some people, I think it was Nick Pollock at certain times this year was singing his praises. It ended up being a 4.49 ERA over 124 innings. It wasn't terrible. He certainly wasn't one of the dark spots of the season with a 133 WHIP. He had not a great strikeout rate of 17%, but he wasn't too bad. He laid the foundation, didn't allow a lot of hard contact, only a 35% hard hit. 7% barrel rate is definitely something you can live with. What's your interest level, Mike, for next season, and what did you think watching Jonathan Cannon this season?
I liked him a lot, and I thought he was pitching in really dire circumstances very often. And towards the end of the season, he was the only guy you could really count on to get 5 out of anybody in that rotation. I liked the pitch mix that he has. I like it a little bit. I wish that he threw his 4-seamer actually less than any other pitch that he had, but he's got a pretty good sinker. and a sweeper turned out to be a pretty nice pitch for him down the stretch too. So I think he got some really good experience this year. He's a really young guy. He's a big dude. He's 6'6". He's a 24-year-old guy. I look at him as eventually, I'm thinking of Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz as being 1 and 2 in this rotation at some point if Crochet's not here. And I think Thorpe is a 3. Cannon's like a good number 4, like a guy that you can just rely on to give the ball to, and he's not going to kill you. A 4.49 ERA on this team is pretty damn good. He actually put together a pretty nice stretch there. To your point, you'd like to see more strikeouts. You'd like to see, the walk rate wasn't horrible. The hard hit rate was really interesting too, because guys really seem to have a hard time kind of locking him up at certain points. And so I think that there's something to be said there. The xERA and the ERA were pretty close to each other. I think this is a guy that you can kind of work on and build with. So for him, I think for me, after I've already got my bevy of starters kind of loaded in a 15-teamer, if I've got 6 or 7 guys already that I feel pretty good about starting, Cannon's definitely a guy that I would take a flyer on late.
You mentioned Noah Schultz now a couple times. Do you think that he starts the year with the team?
That's a great question. I wish I had a little bit more of a crystal ball on that. I think they've really limited him in terms of what they've allowed him to do and how much he's actually pitched. They've really coddled him, and so I don't know that he is a guy that will be ready to start the regular season in the rotation, but he has looked absolutely nasty. Yeah. In the time that he's been in the minors. I mean, even this year, he was they started him out in high A. He ended the season in double A. The White Sox, a very little known fact is that the White Sox Birmingham Barons rotation was the best rotation statistically in all of minor league baseball. Wow. And Schultz was part of that. Cannon had been part of that. Thorpe was part of that before they got called up. And what they did was they kind of rotated those guys around a little bit. Nick Nastrini, Jake Eater, these guys that were down there, and kind of gave all of them a little bit of a taste, except for Schultz. Schultz did not get that taste. Schultz lost every game that he started in double A, but he had 73 strikeouts in 61 innings.
Wow.
So the oomph is 45 hits in 61 innings, So he's got a big. I don't know if you've seen him at all. He's 6'9".
6'9". Wow.
6'9". He's from Oswego, which is a neighboring town here from where I live. Big lefty, kind of got a Chris Sale-like motion, 3/4 length, long extension, as you would imagine. Guys say it's a nightmare picking up the ball. I think he'll be up pretty soon, but he's got to prove that he can kind of add a little bit of length, and I think that they'll manage that pretty hard. So I wouldn't get too excited about him yet. I do think Hagen Smith could start the year in the rotation, though. He's the guy that they took in the first round this year, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they fast-tracked him into the major leagues, especially if they deal Crochet, because they will need somebody to replace him. And there's a lot of really smart people who think that Hagen Smith is a guy that will start in the season in the rotation simply because they have no other options.
You guys are going to need it if you trade Crochet. And another guy who was actually, it was just a couple of starts, but Sean Burke. Sean Burke had a couple of really nice outings, a lot of strikeouts, 28.9% strikeout rate, like only 19 innings, but that's very promising. Only a 1.42 ERA in those 19 innings. Be careful with those small sample sizes, but it was pretty impressive stuff from a guy who's been in your system now for the last few years, Mike. Any late interest in drafts heading into next year on a potential Sean Burke flyer?
Yeah, Burke's a guy that they've been high on for a couple years now. They one of the things that he really had to work on was the walk rate. His walks had always been high, above 5 or 6 per 9 while he was in the minors, but that K rate had been explosive. And so. When he was down in AAA, his strikeout rate was, I think, about 8.5, somewhere around 8.5 or 9 per 9. I know that we don't like to look at that as a great help in all of that stuff, but another guy who really seemingly knows how to pitch, has a good feel for it. And I think it definitely is a guy that starts the season in the rotation next year. The one thing is he had not had great numbers before he came up, and he got to the majors, and he looked the part, So hard to say. Is we'll get a little bit of fool's gold there, maybe, but Burke definitely showed a little bit there towards the end. In a very small sample. I mean, I think he got 3 starts at the end of the season, but looked like he could be a guy that they could use moving forward.
The last thing I want to ask you on Mike here, and it's fitting because if you guys aren't familiar with Mike's work, you should be familiar with his work. But if you're not, bullpens are kind of your forte. And I don't know what the hell to make of this pen. The save leader for the year was Michael Kopech with 9 saves.
Right.
After that, it goes down to 2. John Brebbia, Tanner Banks, Jordan Leisure each had 2 saves. I don't know what the hell to make of it. As of right now, on Fangraphs, they have Justin Anderson listed as the closer.
Yeah.
Is that, you think, what the plan is going to be heading into next year? Or because I don't really think they're going to, be an attractive market. I'm not even sure what closers will be on the market, but I can't see anybody really signing with the White Sox. They're going to have to probably go in-house. Is it going to be Justin Anderson, the 32-year-old, or is it somebody else? What do you think?
No, I think that they do have some options. I'm not saying that any of them are really good. I don't think Justin Anderson is the closer. I think I don't even know if he's going to be on the team next year, quite honestly. I know Fangraphs has to put somebody in that spot.
Yeah.
They did have pretty good efforts from a couple of guys down the stretch in Fraser Ellard and Prelander Baroa, who actually, again, looked the part. I mean, Baroa is the guy that they got in the Gregory Santos trade that a lot of people in Seattle were high upon, who was kind of lost in the shuffle there with all their good bullpen arms that they had there. But Ellard and Baroa were 2 guys who definitely look like they could contribute next year. Ellard is not a young guy. He's a lefty. He's 26 or 27. I think Gus Varland showed pretty good in stretches for them, but he too is a veteran, not somebody that you can really count on. They did get Ron Marinaccio and Enyel De Los Santos off the scrap heap in the middle of the season. Marinaccio towards the end. He's somebody that could have a role in there. But they have a couple of guys in the minor leagues that I think we should earmark and talk about. One of those being Jordan Leisure. He had a very hard time of it. He started off the season really well. And then kind of crapped out there towards the middle. Matt Foster is another guy that's there who's coming back from arm surgery, did pitch a little bit at the end of the season. Somebody that has had a good role for them in the past. And they also have a couple of other guys down in AAA that they might look at. Sammy Peralta is another one. I don't like him very much, but I think they sort of like him. They have another guy named Grant Taylor who's going to be in the Arizona Fall League that I think they're also high on as a bullpen arm, and another guy named Peyton Pallett who is also in AFL, who both had good results pitching out of the bullpen. So I think that they're going to try to fill in from the back end with that. Some old names that Sox fans know, some new names that might come out, and they'll always sign somebody off the scrap heap. There'll be guys that are looking for work that they might sign and give a look to, like not Brebbia, but guys like Brebbia, guys like Justin Anderson that are looking for work in the middle of it that could end up coming in and getting a role. If you forced me to say who the closer would be right now, I would say it would be Jordan Leisure. Okay. That would be my guess. Baroa's got the stuff to be able to do it too, I think.
Okay. So I guess Leisure, if he'd probably have to be like a 3rd or 4th closer if you're talking about when you're drafting for next year. Like, let's say, because people are, there are degenerates out there like us who are already in draft rooms. Sounds like Leisure would be your preferred target, but I don't think you trust him as like your 2nd closer. Would you have to be a 3rd or 4th?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We just don't know how many opportunities anybody's going to get in this bullpen, right? I mean, the signs are pointing to it being another horrible year next year. However, I will say this. The White Sox only won 41 games, and that's been well documented. But if they had any semblance of a bullpen, they probably would have won 20 more. Now, you say, okay, 20 more into 61 wins. Okay, fine. But then you're not talking about historically bad. You're just talking about like for that year bad. Yeah. So this would be a simple way to kind of attack a problem that they have, which would be, spend a little bit of money on fixing the bullpen, at least putting like reputable arms in there and seeing what you get with some young guys kind of mixed in. And if you get a decent result there, you'd be good. I mean, here's the thing about Kopech too. He sucked for a really long time.
Yeah.
And he got to LA. He was starting to make changes in Chicago before he went to LA. And you know what they said the changes were? He finally started listening to his coaches. This is the guy, every time he gets in trouble, he just wants to throw it harder. It's going to end up costing LA at some point. I guarantee you it will cost them at some point if they go far enough in this series or the next one. He will do something that's so ridiculous that you'll be like, what? Really? But to his credit, he's pitched really well for them since he left Chicago. I just don't see anybody that I would be super interested in at this point walking away with that job.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, there weren't a lot of saves to go around last year. There'll be more probably. Like to your point, I don't think this will be a historically bad team again. They'll probably win 60 some odd games next year. There'll probably be 25 or so saves to go around. Maybe it's leisure, but a little bit too soon on that front to speculate on the White Sox pen until we kind of see where the pieces fall this offseason. But Mike, I've kept you longer than I had wanted to here, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to me today. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Of course, Joe. Anytime you need me, you know I'm around. So I love coming on with you. We always have good conversation, and I look forward to catching up with you in person here in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. We're going to be drinking. We're going to be talking baseball. We're going to be going to games, doing all that kind of fun stuff. Make sure, again, check out Baseball HQ if you guys are interested in coming down to the desert, hanging out with us. Make sure you guys are following Mike over on Twitter at MDRC0508. He does great work at a number of different places, and make sure you're checking out his podcast. It's become one of my favorites over the last couple of years. So make sure on the Triple Play Fantasy feed, you guys are subscribed over there. If you want to check out my work, that's Joe Orico99. Just follow along over on Twitter. A little bit of a downturn right now for content because, well, there's no baseball going on, but we're going to ramp it up again very, very soon. We'll have Mike on again, I'm sure, to talk some relievers as the year goes on. But that'll do it for us for today. We're going to be doing a couple more team previews later on this week. We'll leave you in suspense as to who that'll be. I'm still working out the schedule. But until next time, everybody, take care. Have yourselves a great night.